Red and blue police lights slashed through the darkness of my brand new living room. My own father had called 911 for a welfare check, telling the officers I had suffered a violent mental breakdown. His only proof. I had changed my locks and dared to refuse him $40,000 for my worthless brother's new toy. This man was willing to throw me into a psychiatric ward just to keep leeching off my bank accounts. He stood there, right outside my door, faking tears over my illness, having no idea that I was already holding a folder full of his forged signatures and a recording of his confession. He came to finally break me and take my home, but instead, he handed me the rope to hang his own reputation. Stay tuned to find out how I systematically dismantled his career and forced my entire family to drown in their own poison. The closing office in downtown Austin hummed with the sterile clicking of keyboards and the faint, sharp scent of fresh toner. The loan officer offered a professional smile as she slid a heavy stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. "Clara Evelyn Vance, congratulations on your first home," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet, high-ceilinged room. I turned toward the waiting area. Rows of empty leather chairs stared back at me. There were no proud parents, no celebratory bouquets, no camera flashes to mark the moment. My colleague, Sarah, snapped a quick photo on her phone and tilted her head. "Where's the welcoming committee? Did they get caught in the afternoon rush?" I forced a nod, the corners of my mouth tight. "Yeah, they're probably just running behind." That evening, standing in the kitchen of my new apartment, I tossed my keys onto the granite counter and checked my phone. A message from my father lit up the screen. "Send $40,000 so Julian can put a down payment on that vintage coupe. We can't have him looking like a failure while you're out buying property." There was no "congratulations." No "how does the new place feel?" Just a demand. I stared at the text, opened my banking app, and transferred exactly $1. In the memo line, I typed, "For the bus." As the confirmation screen flickered, something final shifted inside me. I called a locksmith that hour. I watched in silence as he installed a heavy brass deadbolt under the hallway light, solid, unyielding, and new. For the first time in my life, the door belonged to me alone. For nights later, the rhythmic strobe of red and blue lights cut through my blinds. I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the microwave to beep, when a heavy, authoritative knock rattled the door. I peeked through the eye of the door to see two officers in the hallway, one adjusting his radio, the other holding a notepad. I opened the door as far as the security chain would allow. "Can I help you, officers?" "Good evening," the taller one said, his badge glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. "We received a request for a welfare check from your father. He claimed you've cut off contact and he's worried about your mental state." I unlatched the chain and stepped back, gesturing for them to enter. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and floor wax. On the counter, my work laptop sat beside a neatly organized folder containing my closing documents. The younger officer scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the framed commendation from my firm. "It looks like you're doing just fine," he noted, his tone shifting from professional to almost kind. "I'm just establishing some long overdue boundaries," I replied. They went through the routine questions, stress levels, work environment, any recent health changes. I kept my answers clipped and calm. A new homeowner with a demanding career simply didn't have time for unnecessary drama. The taller officer nodded, jotting a final note. "Your father sounded frantic. He was convinced you were in the middle of a crisis." I almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. "He's worried about losing his grip, not about me." As they turned to leave, the younger officer paused at the threshold. "People tend to panic when they realize they can't pull the strings anymore. It happens more often than you'd think." The deadbolt clicked shut behind them with a heavy, satisfying thud. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle over me like a blanket. Sleep was elusive that night. My mind drifted back to when I was 16, punching the clock at a dusty hardware warehouse after school. The air there always smelled of cold steel and treated lumber. I'd spent my youth counting inventory and hauling crates, my feet throbbing in cheap sneakers while the overhead lights buzzed like a headache. Every paycheck I earned went directly into an account my mother controlled, earmarked for Julian's development. It paid for his private tutors, his designer athletic gear, and that custom mountain bike he just had to have. My father would always pat my shoulder with a heavy hand. "We're investing in the family's future, Clara." I had believed him. I thought my labor was the foundation of something we all shared. But as the years passed, it became clear that the future was a stage built only for Julian. His club fees always came before my textbooks. His spring breaks in Florida were funded by the money that should have gone to my SAT prep courses. I would come home from double shifts with grease under my nails and find him sprawled on the sofa, a controller in his hand. "Thanks, sis," he'd mutter, never looking up from the screen. Dad never saw the exhaustion etched into my face. To him, I wasn't a daughter, I was the engine keeping the golden boy's life running smooth. By the time I was 20, I had clawed my way through night school and online certifications, working every hour of overtime the firm would give me. My father would still offer that same hollow praise, telling me to keep the checks coming because Julian had such potential. Potential, it seemed, was an expensive habit that involved entry fees for amateur races and a revolving door of new hobbies. I kept wiring the money, telling myself it was a temporary sacrifice. I graduated with honors, fought my way into a high-end real estate firm, and finally closed the deal that allowed me to buy the house on Cedar Street. I had worked through every holiday and every weekend to get here. And still, when the time came to sign the papers, no one showed up. The visit from the officers replayed in my mind, their calm professionalism contrasted against my father's manufactured panic. He hadn't called once to ask if I needed help moving. He only cared once the locks were changed, and the resource he'd exploited for a decade was suddenly out of reach. I paced the living room, my bare feet enjoying the cool touch of the hardwood. For years, I had measured my worth in installments and favors, convinced that if I just gave enough, they would finally see me. But the scale was never going to balance. I stopped at the counter and looked at my cooling dinner. The quiet wasn't empty anymore, it felt earned. It was the first deep breath after holding it for a lifetime. No more footsteps I didn't invite. No more demands whispered through the cracks. I took a bite, the simple flavor grounding me in the present. Tomorrow would bring whatever it chose, but tonight, this space was mine. And that was more than enough. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee and opened my credit monitoring app out of habit. I froze. A new hard inquiry stared back at me, dated 3 days prior. It was an auto loan for $40,000 at Lone Star Federal. The co-signer was listed as Marcus Vance. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I scrolled through the details. A high-performance sport coupe, scheduled for delivery at the dealership in North Austin. The address on the application wasn't mine, it was the old family home on Willow Creek. I set my mug down so hard the coffee sloshed over the rim, staining the white counter. This wasn't a clerical error. My father had used my social security number, my birth date, everything from the sensitive documents I had left in their safe years ago. I dialed the bank's fraud line, my fingers steady despite the cold fury rising in my chest. Lone Star Federal, this is David. How can I help you? I provided my details and the account number. There is an unauthorized auto loan on my report, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I heard the rapid clack of keys. Yes, ma'am. It was opened in person at our Guadalupe Street branch. The primary applicant provided your identification and social. The co-applicant, Marcus Vance, also signed in person. My father had walked into a bank, smiled at a teller, and forged my life away to buy Julian a toy. Freeze it immediately, I told him. And I want the full application packet, signatures, copies of the IDs used, everything. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my new home, my hands finally beginning to shake. The loan showed pending transactions for custom rims, a performance exhaust, and dealer fees, all for a car my brother hadn't spent a single day earning. I needed a confession. Texas was a one-party consent state for recordings, so I opened the app on my phone, labeled the file, and called my father. He answered on the fourth ring. I could hear the television blaring in the background. Finally decided to talk. He barked. "Explain the $40,000 loan in my name," I said. There was a pause, then a short, dismissive chuckle. "Just building Julian's credit, Clara. You're doing so well with that new place of yours. Share the wealth. Family helps family." My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles turned white. "You forged my signature, Marcus." Another laugh, airy and unbothered. "It's an investment. He'll pay it back once he's on his feet. Stop being so dramatic." The line crackled with his absolute certainty, as if I were the one out of line for catching him in a felony. "What's mine is not yours," I said, and ended the call before he could twist the knife any further. The recording saved automatically, 23 seconds of pure evidence. I transferred the file to my laptop and backed it up to the cloud. Next, I logged into the bank portal and downloaded the application. My father's looping signature sat right next to a photocopy of my old driver's license, the one I had reported lost during my senior year of college. He had kept it all this time. The timestamp on the application matched a Tuesday I had spent in back-to-back meetings across the city. There was no physical way I could have been at that branch. I printed the documents at a local shop, the pages still warm from the laser. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the thickness of the file, but I ignored him. Back home, I slid the stack into a plain manila folder and labeled it simply, "Bank File." It sat on my desk next to my house deed. Two worlds colliding. The coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. It tasted bitter, like the realization that my father saw my success not as a milestone to be celebrated, but as a resource to be harvested. On Saturday at noon, I pulled into the dealership lot where Julian had once worked a summer job. The asphalt shimmered under the Texas sun, rows of new cars gleaming with factory wax. I parked near the service bay, the folder resting on the passenger seat, and waited. My father's truck rolled in 15 minutes late. My mother was in the passenger seat, and Julian was lounging in the back, sunglasses perched on his head. They climbed out, my father adjusting his polo shirt with an air of unearned importance. I stepped out of my car, the envelope in my hand. "We need to talk." My father gestured toward the air-conditioned showroom. "Let's go inside. It's too hot out here." "Right here is fine," I said. Julian leaned against the truck, his thumbs busy on his phone. My mother glanced around the busy lot, her eyes darting toward other customers. "This isn't the place for this, Clara," she whispered. I opened the folder anyway, pulling out the bank statements. An auto loan for $40,000. My name. Your address. My father's jaw tightened. "It's a misunderstanding. We'll pay it back." "Your father meant well," my mother added quickly. Julian smirked, not even looking up from his screen. "Yeah, chill out. It's just a car." I ignored him and slid the application across the hood of the truck. My father's signature was bold, my social security number was printed clearly below it. "Forged in person at the Guadalupe branch," I said. The color drained from my mother's face. "Marcus. You said the bank had already approved her as a guarantor." Before he could respond, my phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from Aunt Martha. I answered it and propped the phone against the windshield. Her tanned, judgmental face filled the screen. "What is this I hear about a parking lot ambush?" she started. "Your father is just trying to do something nice for his son, Clara. Julian deserves a win." I turned the phone so the camera hit the forged documents. He deserves a win on my credit. Martha squinted at the screen. That's not how Marcus explained it. My father stepped closer to the phone. Martha, it's temporary. She's overreacting like she always does. I hit play on the recording. My father's voice crackled through the speaker, just building Julian's credit, share the wealth. The lot went silent. A salesman nearby paused mid-sentence. A couple looking at an SUV turned to stare. Julian's sunglasses slipped down his nose. Turn that off, my mother whispered, her voice trembling. Aunt Martha's eyes widened on the screen. You recorded your own father. The call ended abruptly, the screen going black. My father's face was a deep, mottled red. You had no right, he hissed. I gathered the papers and tucked them back into the folder. The bank will decide who has rights now. Not the family. Julian kicked at the gravel. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing us. A mechanic drove a sport coupe past us, the engine roaring. My father reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip light but firm. Think about your mother, Clara. Think about what this will do to her. I pulled my arm free and looked him straight in the eye. I've thought about all of you for years. That's exactly why I'm doing this. I turned the phone toward the papers, the screen bright in the midday glare. He deserves them on my credit. I asked. Martha squinted, her expression shifting from indignation to confusion. That's not how it looks, Marcus, she said slowly. My father leaned closer to the dashboard, his shadow falling over the documents. Martha, it's a temporary arrangement. She's overreacting, as usual. I didn't argue. I simply tapped the play button on my recording app. My father's voice crackled through the car's speakers, clear and unmistakable, just building Julian's credit. You're doing so well. Share the wealth. The parking lot went still. A salesman nearby, who had been mid-pitch to a young couple, trailed off. The couple themselves stopped, their eyes fixed on our group. Julian's sunglasses slipped down his nose as he finally looked up from his phone. Turn it off, my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. Martha's eyes widened on the screen. You recorded your own father, Clara. The call ended abruptly, leaving a black screen and a heavy silence. My father's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. You had no right to do that, he hissed. I gathered the papers and tucked them back into the folder, securing the latch. The bank will decide who has rights now, I said. This isn't a family matter anymore. Julian kicked at the gravel, the sound sharp in the quiet lot. You're embarrassing us, he muttered. A mechanic drove a high-performance coupe past us, the engine's roar echoing off the showroom glass. My father reached out, his hand hovering near my arm. Think about your mother, Clara. Think about what this will do to her. I stepped back, out of his reach. I've thought about her for years. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she remained silent, a statue of complicity. I slid into my car, the folder heavy and secure on the seat beside me. As I backed out of the space, I saw the salesman watching us, slowly shaking his head. The figures of my family shrank in my rearview mirror, standing small and defiant beneath the fluttering flags of the dealership. Driving home, I let the air conditioning blast cold against my skin. My father's denials echoed in my head, but the proof sat right next to me, undeniable and cold. It was my mother's silence that cut the deepest. She had chosen her side without saying a single word. Julian's entitlement, Martha's blind defense, it all fit a pattern I had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. The Austin traffic thickened as I merged onto the highway. I rolled the windows down, letting the hot Texas wind tug at my hair. No more explanations were needed. At a red light, I glanced at the folder again. The bank packet included the surveillance photos, my father smiling at the teller, my old, lost license clipped to the application. He had planned this, timed it perfectly to coincide with my own house closing, betting that I'd be too distracted to notice. But even the best-laid plans crack under scrutiny. The light turned green, and I accelerated, the city skyline blurring ahead of me. Whatever fallout was coming, I was ready to face it. 2 weeks later, Julian posted a countdown on his social media feed. New ride in 24 hours, the caption read, accompanied by a photo of him grinning beside a sleek blue sports sedan, keys dangling from his finger. The comments were a sea of fire emojis and congratulations from friends. I scrolled through them from my couch, the bank's formal freeze notice still open on my laptop screen. Lone Star Federal had not backed down. The following afternoon, the bank canceled the loan entirely, citing irreconcilable verification discrepancies. An email followed informing me that bank representatives, accompanied by local law enforcement, would be attending the dealership for a formal document review. It was standard procedure for suspected identity theft involving a high-value asset. I closed the laptop. There was no need for me to be there. Inside the dealership showroom, the lights gleamed off polished floors and chrome accents. Julian stood center stage beside the blue sedan, his arms crossed as the salesman clapped him on the shoulder. My father hovered nearby, checking his watch with an air of restless triumph, while my mother sat on a leather bench, aimlessly flipping through a brochure. The scene was interrupted when 2 officers entered, their uniforms crisp, followed by a man in a sharp gray suit carrying a tablet. The taller officer approached the group. Afternoon. We're here to verify the financing on this vehicle. Julian's grin faltered. It's my car. The papers are already signed. The bank representative opened his tablet, scrolling through a file. Loan number ending in 472. Primary name, Clara Vance. Co-signer, Marcus Vance. He turned the screen toward my father. We have a signature mismatch and a significant address discrepancy. My father stepped forward, his voice rising. There's been a simple mix-up. We can clear this up in the office. The officer raised a hand, stopping him. We just need to see the original documents used for the application. Julian reached into his bag and pulled out a handful of crumpled forms. The representative compared them to the digital copies on his tablet. This cosigner line does not match the authorized user on file, he said. The atmosphere in the showroom shifted instantly. Other customers paused, their conversations dying away. A family with small children stopped nearby, the father discreetly tilting his phone to record the interaction. My mother stood up, her face pale. Officers, please, this is a private family matter. The younger officer shook his head. Bank policy requires on-site confirmation for disputed accounts of this nature, ma'am. This is harassment. My father shouted. We are paying customers. The representative continued, his voice steady and loud enough for the room to hear. We have a report of an unauthorized cosigner using stolen identity documents. A ripple of gasps went through the showroom. A teenager standing by the glass doors began filming vertically, whispering into his phone. Julian's face turned a violent shade of red, his sunglasses pushed up like a headband. Turn that off. He snapped at the kid. The salesman began to back away, his hands raised in a gesture of neutrality. Folks, let's take this to the back office. The vehicle remains on hold until this is resolved, the officer interrupted. Outside, a flatbed tow truck backed into the delivery bay, the driver hopping out with a set of heavy chains. Julian lunged toward the car. You can't take it. It's mine. My father grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Julian, calm down. The bank representative packed his tablet into his briefcase. All parties have been formally notified. Further steps will be handled through legal channels. A loose circle of onlookers had formed, phones held high. The tow driver hooked the sedan, the engine silent as the car was lifted into the air. Julian slumped against a display pillar, his eyes wet and his fists clenched tight. My mother dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue, while my father continued to argue with the officer, his gestures sharp and desperate, his words lost in the echoing space of the showroom. By that evening, the footage had hit the local community boards. Austin dealership drama, repo in progress, the headlines read. The views climbed past 50,000 within hours. The comments were brutal. That's the Vance kid. Lone Star doesn't play around. Screenshots of Julian's earlier countdown post began to circulate, the captions mocking his public downfall. By midnight, the video had been shared across every major local group. I watched the numbers climb from the quiet of my home, the notifications on my phone silenced. The world was finally seeing the potential my father had bragged about for so long. By midnight, the video had surpassed 300,000 views, rippling through local community boards and neighborhood groups. I sat on my sofa, the blue light of my laptop illuminating the room as I refreshed the threads. Strangers were tagging the dealership, demanding public statements. A representative from the outlet eventually posted a formal apology, vaguely blaming a systemic administrative error. Julian deleted his accounts by morning, but the internet has a long memory. The archives remained, a permanent record of his unearned arrogance. Across the city, my father's truck sat in the driveway on Willow Creek, dark, silent, and suddenly very small. The fallout was spreading faster than any family argument ever could. When the legal envelope arrived, it felt unexpectedly heavy in my hands. I carried it to the dining table and sliced it open. Inside were the filings for a civil suit, Lone Star Federal versus Marcus Vance. The bank was seeking the full $40,000 loan amount, plus $15,000 in legal fees, court costs, and accrued interest. The hearing was scheduled for the following month at the district courthouse. My father filed his own response without an attorney. I could recognize his cramped, defensive handwriting even on the scanned digital copies. On the day of the proceedings, I logged into the virtual courtroom from my home office, my camera off and my microphone muted. The screen displayed the austere wood-paneled walls of the courtroom, the state flag, and a judge whose expression was unreadable behind thick glasses. My father appeared in a small window on the feed, wearing the same gray blazer he wore in our last family holiday photo. The bank's counsel led the presentation, scrolling through slides on the shared screen. The plaintiff presents a loan application with clear signature inconsistencies, an audio recording containing an admission of intent, and a failed secondary verification of the Social Security number, the lawyer stated. The clip of my father's voice played through the speakers, just building Julian's credit, share the wealth. The judge leaned forward, the monitor's light reflecting off his lenses. My father cleared his throat, his voice sounding thin and reedy over the digital connection. This is a private family matter, Your Honor. There was no fraudulent intent. The counsel followed up with stills from the branch's surveillance footage. There was Marcus standing at the counter, handing over the forged documents. The timestamp matched a day I was documented as being in a 3-hour board meeting. I planned to cover the payments, my father added, his voice trailing off. The judge reviewed the exhibits for a few moments, asked 2 brief, pointed questions, and then delivered his ruling. Judgment for the plaintiff. The full amount plus costs. The entire process took exactly 8 minutes. My father's image on the screen seemed to freeze, his eyes wide with a shock that was years in the making. By noon the next day, word of the judgment reached his employer. Human Resources issued his termination paperwork within 48 hours, citing a breach of the company's ethics policy regarding personal integrity. His colleagues boxed up his desk, the coffee mug, the framed photo of Julian in a Little League uniform, the brass nameplate. Security escorted him to the parking garage, his badge already deactivated. There was no farewell lunch, no letter of recommendation. Julian withdrew from his classes halfway through the semester as his world collapsed. He eventually found work pulling night shifts at a logistics hub near the airport, scanning barcodes under the unforgiving hum of industrial lights. He traded his designer clothes for a uniform polo and steel-toed boots, standing beside conveyor belts that stretched into the shadows. His paychecks barely covered half the rent for a cramped studio he shared with 3 other men. My mother extended her hours at the medical billing office, processing insurance claims until the sun went down. She stopped attending her book club and began doing her grocery shopping before dawn to avoid the neighbors. The house on Willow Creek grew quiet. The grass went unmown, and the mail began to stack up in the box. Neighbors whispered about the missing sedan, which had been repossessed in the middle of the night. Monthly notices arrived from the bank, detailing the automatic deductions from my father's severance and the direct withdrawals from their joint savings. The balance drained steadily. Julian's warehouse wages were a drop in the bucket against the utility bills. My mother's overtime filled the gaps for a while, but eventually, the credit cards hit their limits. A judgment lien was attached to the property, clouding the title and making it impossible to sell. My father began listing his belongings on local marketplaces, his golf clubs, his power tools, the old gaming consoles Julian used to play. Buyers would show up in the driveway, bargaining him down and paying in cash. I archived the final confirmation of the account closure. There was no sense of triumph, only a quiet, heavy sense of completion. One evening, my mother slipped a plain white envelope under my door. There was no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper in her neat, flowing cursive read, "We're sorry. Call us when you're ready." I read it twice. Then, I fed it through the shredder. Life returned to clean lines. No shared accounts, no overlapping obligations, no hidden traps. I tucked the court file into a locked drawer alongside my insurance papers. Winter passed, the Texas roads cleared, and the distance between us remained intact. 6 months after the closing, I carried the final box into my new home, the words "New Start" scrawled across the side in black marker. The entryway smelled of fresh paint and possibility, the hardwood floors cool beneath my feet. I set the carton down by the stairs and looked out at the open floor plan. Sunlight streamed through the tall, uncovered windows, dust motes drifting in the golden beams. I took the old brass deadbolt, the one I had replaced at the apartment, and mounted it on the wall of my study, right beside my new key rack. The contrast was striking, aged, weathered brass beside polished, modern chrome. Sarah showed up later that afternoon with takeout and a 6-pack of beer. She began unpacking plates as she chatted about the latest listings. "It's a perfect blank canvas, Clara," she said, stacking glasses in the new cabinets. My work kept me busy. Open houses on the weekends, contracts and negotiations during the week. I guided a young couple through a bungalow similar to mine, highlighting the updates and the potential for growth. When they signed the offer that evening, the wife gripped my hand. "Thank you for making this happen for us," she said. I smiled, handing her the pen. "You earned it." I had long since deleted every family contact from my phone. My father, my mother, Julian, Martha. The numbers were erased, the profiles unfollowed. The phone stayed quiet now. No surprise pings of guilt, no demands bleeding through the screen. My notifications were trimmed to the essentials. Peace, I realized, was something you had to build, brick by brick, and then defend with everything you had. Sarah hosted the housewarming that Saturday. She had invited the whole office and a few friends from the neighborhood. String lights crisscrossed the patio, and the air was thick with the savory scent of grilled steaks and wood smoke. Guests mingled, their laughter weaving into a melody that filled the backyard. Someone raised a glass to second chances, and for the first time, the sentiment didn't feel like a cliché. Later, I stepped away from the noise and leaned against the deck railing. The Austin skyline was a faint, shimmering line in the distance. Below, the city hummed, the low thrum of traffic, the occasional whistle of a distant train. The evening breeze carried the crisp, clean scent of the hill country. My phone sat dark on the railing. No frantic messages, no guilt-laden texts. Just a blank screen. It was a piece I had bought with my own courage, and it was worth every cent. My calendar soon began to fill with people who valued my expertise. Retirees looking for a quiet corner, first-time buyers, and a veteran who shook my hand after his closing and told me I'd made the impossible happen. Every deal felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my own story. At the party, someone had noticed the old brass deadbolt mounted on my study wall and asked about it. "What's the story with the hardware?" they asked, tilting their drink toward the brass. "It's a symbol of where the line is," I said simply. They smiled and moved back toward the music. Sarah nudged me as she passed by. "You really did it, Clara." It was a simple observation, but it carried the weight of a heavy truth. Routine eventually took root. There were morning runs through the park, late-night emails, and weekends spent staging homes for new families. The house on Cedar Street gained a warmth it hadn't had before, succulents lined the windowsills, and local art began to fill the walls. Neighbors waved during my evening walks, and invitations for coffee started to follow. It was a community built by choice, not by blood or obligation. I learned the hard way that family isn't defined by who claims your victories, but by who stands beside you while you build them. Clean breaks heal the fastest, even if the scar remains. 3 months later, a message popped up on my professional networking profile from one of my father's former associates. I recognized his face from those stifling holiday parties years ago. "Hey, Clara. Long time. Just thought you'd want an update. Marcus packed up and moved to Florida. He's staying with Martha now. Julian is pulling shifts at a distribution center near San Antonio." I read the message while sitting at my desk, the office quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of keys nearby. The details painted a stark new reality. My father was likely sleeping on a fold-out bed under Martha's roof, following her strict rules about the thermostat and the dishes. Julian was wearing a neon vest, scanning totes on a conveyor belt where the breaks were timed to the minute, and the quotas never stopped climbing. A follow-up notification arrived shortly after. The bank matter had been settled. I logged into the Lone Star Federal portal and saw the status, paid in full. My father had liquidated his retirement rollover to satisfy the judgment. The lien was lifted. My credit was pristine. No alerts, no balance, no more ties. I archived the thread, my cursor hovering for only a second before I hit delete. From my window, I watched a delivery truck idle across the street. 2 drivers hopped out, their arms loaded with heavy boxes, the same grueling routine Julian lived every day now. I felt no envy and no pity. It was simply an observation of their choices and their outcomes. My own focus remained on my listings and the lives I was helping to build. I cleared my browser history and watched the laptop screen dim to black. The message dissolved into digital dust, uninvited and unnecessary. I realized then that I didn't owe anyone a response. Our lives had diverged, the paths sealed behind us. Family isn't the name on a birth certificate, it's the hand signing beside yours at the closing table. I had found that clarity through silence and the strength of a blocked call. Obligation dies when respect is no longer reciprocal. In the garage, I dug through a few remaining storage bins until I found an old wooden plaque. "Home Sweet Home" was written across it in a simple, weathered script. I grabbed my level and a drill and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The mailbox post stood waiting. I leveled the sign, tightened the screws, and stepped back to look at it. It hung steady and straight, a greeting to the street, and a promise to myself. I was moving forward, and I wasn't looking back.